The Ray Nixon plant with Colorado Springs Utilities is the interesting test case because they do not consent. They have not entered into some settlement agreement saying that, we think it's a good idea and we think it'll be just fine if we shut this coal plant down. That, I think, is going to go to court, and that will be an interesting test of, I think, federal and state policy dynamics at loggerheads. I don't see a feasible way that they're going to shut down this coal plant and make sure that Colorado Springs Utilities ratepayers aren't paying through the nose. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of PowerGab, your go-to show for all things energy and environmental policy in the state of Colorado. I'm Jake Fogleman, joined as always by my co-host Amy Cooke. And for this week's show, we want to do a little bit of a federal update because there's been a few things that have happened in the past couple of weeks that the feds have done that directly stand to impact Colorado, and we've been fielding a lot of questions about some of these things, and so it's just good to get them addressed here. One of them, of course, is President Trump's one big, beautiful bill that was passed by the July 4th deadline that they set for themselves, signed into law. And among other things in that massive bill, you saw a pretty substantial phase out of the so-called Inflation Reduction Act tax credits, all of the subsidies for wind and solar, subsidies for heat pumps and for electric vehicles, and basically all of the progressive movement's favorite climate technologies. They just got a bunch of free money under Biden. A lot of that will be drying up very soon under this bill. And as a result, we've seen a lot of apoplectic media coverage that the sky is going to fall because there's no longer a federal gravy train coming to Colorado's rescue. What's going to happen to electricity prices? What would you say to folks that are raising those claims?
Well, first of all, I start laughing because the federal government giveth and then taketh away. Mm-hmm. I mean, do people not learn? Just look at those poor folks in New Orleans for Hurricane Katrina. I mean, they remember, people are going to come rescue you. Yeah, well, don't rely on the federal government. But what I hear a lot is that electricity prices are going to skyrocket because the federal government isn't going to be subsidizing Colorado's fantasy with wind, solar, and batteries. And the answer to that is no, they're not. In fact, unless there's a rate case at the PUC, your electricity prices are going to be the same. For now, it's not the subsidies that are causing prices to either go up or down. What's going to happen, Jake, and to all of you out there, is that you are finally going to have to bear the full brunt of Colorado's bad decision making. For a very long time, Coloradans have been shielded against the actual cost of this forced march to wind, solar, and batteries, and now they're going to have to pay the entire cost. Coloradans are going to have to pay for Colorado energy policy. The only thing that subsidies did, they did not lower the cost of electricity. All they did is disguise who paid for it. So a wealthy person in Boulder could virtue signal that wind, solar, and batteries, while a working family in New Mexico or Mississippi was actually paying the price through subsidies. So Coloradans are finally going to have to pay for the bad decision that their elected officials have made. I think it's past time, Jake, that Colorado understands just how expensive this forced march to wind, solar, and batteries will be. So the cost isn't going up. We're just going to have to pay it now. There's transparency as to who will be paying for it. You're not going to be able to socialize the cost across all the entire United States. You will own the cost. And so I got to tell you, this is where elections have consequences.
Yep. And this is honestly the prudent way to do this sort of policy, right, is that you should internalize the own costs that you create. It's kind of a shame that in a bit of an indictment, honestly, on media coverage that we have to clear this up. But removing subsidies doesn't increase the price. Like you said, the cost stays the same regardless of who's paying the tab. It's more of just a mask off or a transparency, as you put it, on the pricing. There's a reason that when we do our analysis and our modeling, for instance, at Independence Institute, we always say we don't include subsidies because subsidies do not fundamentally change the cost of providing a service. They just kind of shift. They play games, shell games with who's picking up the tab there. It's worth noting that we won't know exactly the full repercussions of this tax credit phase out just yet, because I think there's still a few guidance issues from the Treasury Department and a couple of other regulatory agencies that have to work themselves out before we fully see the brunt of what's going to happen. But the good news is that finally the Inflation Production Act, at least the worst parts of it, are soon to be no more.
Right. That's exactly right. And then it doesn't mean there won't be any more wind, solar, or batteries built in Colorado.
That's another good point.
I'm not that lucky. They will continue to be built because they still, I think it's at, is it at the end of 2027?
27.
That the Senate put it to the end of 27, but it gave them a 1-year safe harbor, meaning they would have essentially 5 years to put it into production if they spend 5% on the project. Well, you can spend 5%, just on marketing something. So they'll have a 1-year safe harbor, and that goes through the end of 2028, which is the end of President Trump's his term. But those projects don't have to come online until I think it's 2032, 2033, something like that. Mm-hmm. So here's the point: you'll still see wind and solar built in Colorado. And can I just point out one other thing on this? Seriously, remember, solar's the cheapest form of energy. How many times have we heard that? Yeah. If it's so darn cheap, why do they need all the subsidies? So the question is, can wind, solar, and batteries, do they make any economic sense if they don't have a 30% subsidy? And the answer is likely no. So, but they're going to try and force a whole bunch of projects in between now and 2027, and then between 2027 and 2028 to get that safe harbor.
It's a great point that you bring that up, because I was going to say it really is. It comes down to it's put up or shut up time for a lot of wind, solar, and battery projects. Because, like you said, for the last 5-6 years or so, we've heard talk about this monumental cost collapse in wind and solar, and it's now cheaper than natural gas, cheaper than coal. Well, good. You don't need the subsidies anymore. The market will bear that out, and we'll let the chips fall where they may. You don't need the taxpayer gravy anymore, if that's the case. And
then we'll see what ratepayers think.
Right. And then ratepayers no longer have the wool over their eyes as to what this is actually costing them to do this sort of policy. I think it's all for the good that this is happening. Let the market work it out. Let ratepayers see what it costs, and let them vote accordingly. Speaking of the feds, another thing that just happened that we have to touch on, I think it was first reported in Colorado Public Radio. I think the Post has now picked it up as well. But we have news now that the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, under President Trump, is officially looking into Colorado's plans to shutter coal plants. We've talked about this in past episodes as Trump has been looking at coal closures in other states, wondering if the same might happen here in Colorado. Sure enough, we get some news that they have at least started the beginning of a rulemaking to look at Colorado's state implementation plan for EPA's regional haze regulations, and the fact that they tried to justify shuttering coal as part of that plan. And the EPA is saying, we don't want any part of that in your SIP, using the federal law to justify shutting down your coal plants prematurely. And I think it's going to kick up a bit of a hornet's nest here in Colorado.
Yeah, this is actually really interesting, Jake, because and there are so many aspects to it, but we're gonna focus on a couple. And one is this idea of a takings. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And then the state officials, their spin on it's just economics that it's shutting down coal plants, which is laughable at best. So here's what happened. So you talked about the SIP. And the SIP is from 2022. Mm-hmm. So Biden's in office, right? And it looks like they're going to be able to push this through. Well, the EPA has come back and said, they have agreed with part of the state's SIP, and they've disagreed with part of it. And the part they've disagreed with, as you pointed out, are these coal plant closures. And they actually drilled down a little bit more, and they specifically mentioned Colorado Springs Utility. We've had Travis Deal, who's the CEO of CSU, on the show before, and he talked about, he was really the first person, and we've talked about this a bunch. One of the first, he was really the only public person and one of the first people to in the utility space to say, to essentially tell Jared Polis, we can't do this. That we will literally bankrupt Colorado Springs Utilities customers. There is no way that we can do this. And retiring assets, coal assets, prematurely is a bad move economically for the utility and certainly for Colorado Springs ratepayers. And he kept saying it. Well, now what you have is the EPA essentially coming in and saying, listen, you've got Colorado Springs Utility that doesn't want to shut down a power plant, and the state, they don't think that the state has the authority under the Clean Air Act to shut it down because it's a takings. You have a utility that they're calling it a compelled or a forced closure. They don't want to close it. The state is saying you have to close it under our state implementation plan. And the EPA is saying, yeah, we don't think you have the legal authority, state of Colorado, to shut down Ray Nixon power plant in Colorado Springs because it's a takings. And it's worse than a take. It's a takings with no compensation.
Right.
So Colorado Springs considers it a forced or hostile shutdown, and they don't want to shut it down. And so my guess is they're pretty darn happy with that today.
Yeah, and that's, this Colorado Springs development, I think, is the key to this, because I don't want folks to get the impression that if the EPA gets their way here, suddenly Comanche stays open and Craig stays open. There's still a whole layer of state regulations and state laws and consenting settlement agreements at the PUC that will keep those shuttered, at least for now. They may change their minds at a later date if the grid gets tight, which we've predicted a couple times on this show here, but those ones are probably going to be unaffected no matter how this rulemaking plays out. But the Ray Nixon plant with Colorado Springs Utilities is the interesting test case because they do not consent. They have not entered into some settlement agreement saying that, we think it's a good idea and we think it'll be just fine if we shut this coal plant down. That, I think, is going to go to court, and that will be an interesting test of, I think, federal and state policy dynamics at loggerheads.
And I think at this point, too, if I'm Colorado Springs Utilities, you just assume you're staying open.
Right.
Like Ray Nixon is staying open. This is what the EPA said in their preliminary decision. The EPA notes that at least one of the sources slated for closure in the SIP, Nixon Unit 1, has expressly stated it does not consent to closing by the enforceable deadline. Then they also go on to note that North American Electric Reliability Corporation, we always say NERC here, they spelled out the whole, they looked at their 2024 assessment for long-term reliability, and they're saying closing is a bad idea because of reliability issues. So it's a takings, and there's a reliability concern as well. And what the EPA is coming in and saying to the state of Colorado, you can't just force the shutdown. Yeah. It's a takings. And clearly Nixon doesn't want to close.
Yeah. In this federal rulemaking that the EPA filed, and we'll drop that in the show notes for anyone that has the bravery to actually read a regulatory rulemaking filing, but I encourage you to. It is interesting. The EPA actually specifically dings Colorado for when it submitted its SIP and when it went to pursue this policy of forced baseload coal closures for not adequately addressing reliability. I love the ending line in this paragraph here. It says, nor did the evaluation discuss what safeguards, if any, the state considered to ensure concerns about grid reliability and electrical demand would be addressed. Basically, the EPA is saying the state paid lip service to grid reliability, like, sure, yeah, we think grid reliability is important. They didn't actually put any meat to that and say, what are you doing to ensure that grid reliability will be maintained when you get rid of all of the baseload coal plants in a matter of 5 or 6 years? So
right, and I've got to say, this is a showdown between Colorado Springs Utility, the EPA, and Jared Polis's ego,
Absolutely.
because he's not letting go of this.
Well, one thing I think is interesting about that, CSU has actually made some noise to Polis specifically. Back in April, we talked about it on the show,
right.
and we had Travis Deal on the show as well. He didn't talk a lot about it because I'm assuming a lot of that stuff's happening behind closed doors. I get it, ongoing discussions and all. But I think it will be interesting to see how Jared Polis responds. Because on the one hand, he'll be under pressure to enforce a hard line with Colorado's bold climate goals and pedal to the metal. But on the other hand, it's kind of embarrassing that the second largest electric utility in the state is saying, hey, man, your policies are not going to work for our customers and you're jeopardizing our ratepayers. And you have to take that seriously if you're the governor.
And you're jeopardizing our ratepayers and you're jeopardizing reliability.
Yeah.
They don't know how they're going to. I mean, he said they don't know how they're going to power their customers, because if you remember, I think he said something like the power purchase agreements are something like 60 to 70% higher than what they had projected.
And that was pre-Inflation Reduction Act credits being repealed, so they're going to be exposed to even higher prices on those PPAs, more than likely, because those independent producers won't get to claim credits to fudge the numbers and keep them even lower. So I don't see a feasible way that they're going to shut down this coal plant and make sure that Colorado Springs utilities ratepayers aren't paying through the nose.
So you also mentioned that Colorado Public Radio was the first one to break this.
That's right.
And so they actually, to their credit, they contacted EPA Region 8 Administrator. He's a state senator out of Wyoming, and his name is Cyrus Western.
Great last name for that position.
Right. It's fantastic. This is what he said. He said, we, meaning EPA, believe that the Clean Air Act does not give anybody the authority to shut down coal generation plants against the owner's will. Isn't a lot of this against? This is why CSU is so important in this. They are a municipal utility. They're the second largest, and their ratepayers just have to pay for everything. It's not like, it's different from Excel, which is, a monopoly utility, an investor-owned utility where they profit off of it and their shareholders are super happy. The shareholders in the case of Colorado Springs Utility are the customers they serve. So this is a huge problem for the state's second largest utility, and they don't want Nixon shut down. And I've got to go back to how CPR actually covers this. First of all, true to form, the former CEO of a Denver-based fracking firm, Chris Wright, to talk about DOE and about how they don't want to, that they're trying to intervene on behalf of coal plants. But of course, they call him a fracking CEO, as if Liberty Energy doesn't do anything else other than hydraulically fracture. But then they go, Colorado is already in the midst of a rapid transition away from coal. Well, is it a transition? Or is it a compelled retirement?
Not only that, but how many times have we talked about utilities being quite alarmed with just how rapid they're trying to do that forced march?
Right.
We talked about it, both Excel and Colorado Springs Utilities waving red flags saying, hey, why don't we pump the brakes here a little bit? This is going a little too fast for our comfort. And one other thing I want to touch on in this article, it's not necessarily CPR's coverage, but just their inclusion of Center of Biological Diversity, CBD, one of the big mega churches of environmentalism that we talk about. And it's one of my pet peeves is just fair weather federalism. They quote him talking about, it speaks broadly to what we're up against as a state. The administration is declaring war on the state's efforts to address climate. Well, I had a sneaking suspicion that CBD was involved under the Biden administration in doing things the opposite way. So I looked into it, and it took me 2 seconds. Sure enough, just last year, they were actively lobbying the EPA to step in and override a local state air quality permit for the state's last coal mine. So the state issued a permit saying, hey, coal mine, you can continue to operate. And they threw a tantrum and ran to the EPA and tried to get the EPA to put the kibosh on that. So it's just funny that when federalism matters and when it doesn't, I just have to point that out because it drives me insane.
It's like local control.
That's right.
It's good when they control the way you want, but
For me, but not for the kind of
100%.
Yeah.
Well, here's another one, and this is from Colorado's, I love this, the Senior Director of Air Quality Programs, Michael Ogletree. So here's what he said, and I think this is hilarious. Utilities are moving away from coal because it's no longer the most affordable or reliable option. Actually, they're moving away from coal because it is the most affordable and reliable option.
Yeah, it's already paid for.
That it's because it's already it's paid for. In most cases, it's paid for. So yeah, it's the most affordable to ratepayers, and utilities are perfectly fine. Let me put that differently. Monopoly or investor-owned utilities like Xcel are more than happy to move away from coal because they can recover the cost of plants, whether they're paid for or not. They get to recover the cost, and they get to build more. They get to build as much as they need. And I got to tell you, the legislature, Jared Polis, and pretty much the PUC have given them most everything they want when it comes to cost recovery. So the reason why, for instance, Xcel is willing to move away from coal is because they make a lot of money by doing so. But it's also the reason, that's a prime reason why that when you compare it to Colorado Springs Utility, where the ratepayers own the utility, they don't want to move away from coal. It's the equivalent of junking your truck in exchange for a temperamental sports car. You're already paid for truck. Or you're already paid for Toyota Camry. It's not the most sexy car on the planet, but you really want to get some temperamental sports car that only has, it's a 2-seater. Which is more of a boutique car. It's your second or third vehicle. It isn't the car you haul your family around in. So the idea that utilities are moving away from coal because it's no longer the most affordable or reliable option is laughable. And many coal plants have already shut down or are on track to retire, driven by economics. And this is my favorite. And cost savings for consumers, not federal mandates. No, you're right. It's not federal mandates. It's state mandates. It's the state of Colorado.
I know. I love the gall that it takes.
And the fact that CPR doesn't even have a modicum of curiosity to ask, well, didn't state public policy have a little to do with it?
Wasn't there an explicit fuel switching bill?
Yes.
Wasn't there a greenhouse gas reduction bill?
Right.
Renewable portfolio standards?
Aren't they given total cost recovery on all of this?
Mm-hmm.
It's the just the lack of curiosity, or it's such laziness on reporting. So,
it is. But that's the niche we try to fill here at PowerGab.
That's right.
That's why, folks, we enjoy our listeners tuning in so they can get the other side of the story that they unfortunately will not hear in our mainstream media coverage on energy policy. And as this EPA sort of spat with Colorado and their green ambitions continues, we'll of course stay on top of it because, like you said, it's going to be a big showdown, I think, in the coming years. Do you have any takeaways for our listeners on this topic here, Amy?
Yeah, one, I do like what you said, regulation for thee, but not for me, right. Or regulate the way I want. So what you have are, dueling, whether it's the state or the feds that can be helpful. So let me put it this way: don't expect principled policy from the environmental megachurches. If you're going there, don't expect principle. 2, Ray Nixon's been given a reprieve, and I think what we'll find is that Colorado Springs will have reliable, affordable power for longer than the rest of us. And for those of the rest of us, and if you're outside of Colorado Springs, service area, make sure you get a couple of generators because chances are your utility was part of an agreement, a consent to shut down your coal-fired power plants. So this particular EPA decision is not likely to impact you. But I do wonder, and this is now I'm getting off on another topic, but I'll say it real quick. I do wonder if ratepayers rise up, if they're the ones paying the bill, if there's a way to change course on this.
Especially if grid conditions get tight. That's I imagine most people will not be happy with that. So
No.
firm your own grid, like Amy always says.
Yep.
Firm your own grid in the meantime. But that does it for us on another episode here. If you like what you saw, you can head over to PowerGab.org to check out our entire back catalog. We produce new episodes every single week. We're also available wherever you get your audio shows, whether that's Spotify or Apple. And if you want to reach out to us to suggest future show topics or guests you'd like to see us interview, you can send those our way at info@powergab.org. We always love hearing from you guys. But until next week, we'll see you.